pressure's on now. What's happening? Pardon me. I may be developing a Nando's allergy. If you have too much of a good thing. All right. Everybody having fun? Cool. Okay. We've got a little bit smaller group here, so we can certainly do, Q&A, or if you disagree, or if you have a comment or a question, yell out, "That's BS, Hanselman," and then we can have a conversation about it, because I think that it's an interesting topic. What I want to talk about today is about .NET modernization, and more than just the going through the motions to go and upgrade a site. You all can go and Google and learn about these things yourself. You can run the .NET upgrade tool. There's lots of stuff online about how to modernize and what modernization means. And you might ask yourself why Microsoft wants you to be on the latest stuff. Is there something that they're trying to do? Are they trying to convince you to move to the latest for some reason? And the fact is, because I'm on the inside, I went to Microsoft 17 years ago to open source .NET, and we did it just like we said we would. The reason is the new stuff is better. And it's not a little bit better. We're learning so much more. If you remember .NET Core and how that felt, going from 4.8 to .NET Core 1, and then going to 3, and going to 6, and now 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we're going and we're updating .NET every November regularly. Some people think that that's too much, and that's why you have LTS and STS. So if you go to .NET, you go and hit download, you come down here, you say all .NET versions, and you can see the dates on all of them. You've got long-term support going till November 2026. So currently, I'm running all of my personal websites on .NET 8 for no other reason than I am lazy, and I don't want to think about them for 2 more years. Okay? I run my personal websites and have myself with my own money. I don't usually trust Microsoft salespeople who have unlimited Azure credits, right? Because then they'll show you how wonderful it is and how fast it is, and they're running on the greatest, amazing hardware. I pay for it with my MSDN subscription, which gives me a $100 credit, and then everything else comes straight out of my credit card. So I'm running multiple production websites in the cloud. I'm running 15 websites, 13 to 15. Those are mostly toy websites. But the 4 big ones are Hanselman.com, my blog, my podcast, and Azure Friday. And they're doing, 2 million page views a month across the 4 of them. It just kind of depends on the holidays. So they're non-trivial. It's not Slashdot, it's not Reddit, but they're not toys. And they're hosting all of my RSS feeds that are being fed into all the podcasting systems, and they are of varying complexities. So I'm running these machines in the cloud and have been for a very long time. If you go to Hanselman.com, even though I haven't blogged a lot since COVID, you go to the dates, I've been blogging basically every Tuesday and Wednesday since April of 2002. So you've got 22 years of stuff out there. And I'm needing to manage all the SSL certificates, manage all the URLs, keep the site up as much as I can, because people on Twitter will complain if I don't, if my site's down. That's usually my main way that I know my site is down, is that someone on social media will tell me your site is down. Okay? Now, the site is run on an application called DOS Blog, D-A-S, not D-O-S, DOS Blog. DOS Blog is German for the blog, and it's true. And DOS Blog was written by Clemens Vasters and me and Omar Shaheen and most recently Mark Downey. And 23 years ago, when I started it all out, I was a Microsoft MVP, and Microsoft gives you free crap for talking about their stuff, and sometimes the partners will give you free crap. And there was a company called OrcsWeb, and OrcsWeb gave me a free VM They were like a hoster. So this is before Azure and the cloud even existed. The cloud hadn't been conceived of yet. And they were like, hey, Microsoft MVP, we'll give you a free computer. It's going to be amazing. And we'll give you this virtual machine in the cloud. VMs had just kind of started, like VMware and Hyper-V were kind of getting started. So I'm like, hey, cool, free hosting, let's go, right? So I just remote desktop directly into production the way God intended, right into a Windows Server 2000 machine. And you go into IIS Manager, and you right-click, and you make a new application, and it was working great. And I let it sit there for years. I think it was in there for probably 10, 12, 13 years, happily. And then I got a notification on social media that I had a yellow screen of death on my site. You all familiar with the ASP.NET yellow screen of death? ASP.NET, yellow screen of death. Screen of death. Did you all sing when you Google for stuff with Bing? Right. And the yellow screen of death effectively says something terrible has happened. And then if you're really awesome, it'll tell you the line of code, which not only tells you that something terrible has happened, but also that you've configured your website poorly for production. Because it's supposed to kind of like silently fail and then email me, but I just didn't care. So I would get that, and someone would send me a screenshot. And the thing said, disk full. I thought, my goodness, that's awkward. So I decided to call support for the first time in 20 plus years. So I call OrcsWeb, and I find out that they don't exist anymore. So that's also awkward. So then I ping my website, because I'm like on the phone, and it's like, the number has been disconnected. So I ping it, and the website's up. And then I look at the website address, and it's a company called SureWeb, which is not OrcsWeb, but is close enough. Turns out that they're a French-Canadian company, and they had bought OrcsWeb years before. So I call the French-Canadians, the Quebecois. Hey, how are you doing? I'm Scott Hanselman. My website is down. And they're like, who are you? I said, well, I'm Scott. Like, you guys gave me a VM 15 years ago, can you give me a bigger disk? And they said, we have no record of you ever existing. So I start digging around, and it turns out that I was the only one that took them up on the free VM. So like this promo that they put out 20 years ago, I'm like, yeah, give me a free VM for life. And then they got bought by this French-Canadian company who then put that machine somewhere in their hosting system, in their cloud, and forgot about it. And it's been just running without anyone knowing that it was a thing. No billing, no nothing. So I'm like, that's a problem. So I give them the IP address, and they say, oh, funny story. That's not actually a virtual machine. It's a physical machine, and it's been under Anna's desk for the last 15 years. It was like a mini tower circa 1998 kind of a machine, kind of like, it was probably like that. All right, not a Power Macintosh. That's probably not exactly like that. It probably looked something like that. Let me see. It was not a good thing. It was a plan. It was an idea they had. There you go. It was like that. You remember those? Remember those ones that said, be sure to turn your computer off in the year 2000 or whatever? Like, hey, before you go to bed at New Year's Eve, turn your computer off or you don't blow up the world. So it was running on a machine, which is problematic for a number of reasons, not just the fact that the thing is starting to turn yellow. But I had thought it had been being backed up all this time. It had not. I'm sure that they had some dashboard that said it was being backed up, but one of the funny things about backups, if you know, is that backups always succeed, right? It is restores that fail. Try that. That is like the truest thing about computer science, other than off-by-one errors and naming stuff, is that backups always work, and then restores fail every single time. So I immediately FTP'd into the machine and started copying everything down to just make sure, because once you observe, there's like a Schrodinger's computer thing. Like, you don't think about it for 15 years and it's fine, but now it knows you're thinking about it, and it's going to start crashing and the bits are going to start rotting. So this particular machine had a 30 gig hard drive. Now, I don't know about you, but I've accidentally inhaled 30 gigs just by putting an SD card in my mouth and being surprised and going, and then suddenly, James Bond movies would be a lot shorter if he would just put whatever the thing he wants on a little SD card and put it under his tongue. Like you could have like a whole James Bond movie that would just be the beginning part where he goes to like confession, they go the body of Christ, and then he puts the secret thing under his tongue, and then he just leaves, and then and then they run the ending credits. I have no idea, like terabytes of data that are this small, accidentally swallowed, but I had a 30 gig hard drive. So I'm like, that's a problem, and I can't make the hard drive bigger because it's not virtualized. So I remote desktop directly into production, which is called Hanselmaning into production. And I start deleting whatever I can. It turns out, though, my blog is just text files, and the only thing I can delete is the logs. And I thought that I would be able to I'd be able to free up some space by deleting the logs, but they're text files, right? So I don't know why I thought me remoting into production and then deleting 300 megs of log files was going to solve the problem. When Windows Update is downloading gigs of garbage and antivirus stuff and all kind of stuff. So I took the crisis from 30 gigs in a full drive to 29.7 gigs. And then basically every week I would have to remote into the machine and delete 300 megs of logs because I didn't take the time to write a script because I'm an idiot. This is the kind of standard modernization thing that we're all in. Someone has an old application at their company right now that hasn't been deployed in a decade, but it works, right? Tell me you haven't got that machine. I can see the pain in your eyes, sir, right? It's just like, I'm afraid of it, don't piss it off, move slowly when you walk by the computer, right? It's fear-based development. Someone at some point on a Windows machine right-clicked and said publish directly from Visual Studio, or your company's deployment strategy involved opening 2 Explorer windows and then dragging a bin folder over to a share somewhere, right? Just so bad. So I was in that situation, and keep in mind that I'm the one who's out here teaching you all how to do things right, while my secret shame is this hard drive is spinning somewhere, like you can hear it. I could imagine myself on the phone with tech support, helping them locate the computer. Don't trust anyone who actually has a hard drive you can hear. But if you can hear that thing, can you imagine me pushing F5 on a browser and then somewhere thousands of miles away in French Canada, it just goes, the guy's walking around trying to find my computer. You know what I mean? I'll show you a graphic of what it looks like. If you've ever seen the end of Indiana Jones, this is where my computer was. Indiana Jones arc. There you go. That's a graphical representation of my computer. It's right there, right? just sitting somewhere in a random place. Seriously, true story. I wish I was on. I'm not on Twitter anymore, but I could go to Twitter and show you that one day when the site went down, I was on Twitter saying, "Oh man, I got to figure out what's going on with my site." One of the tech support guys that worked for that company was in the warehouse and DM'd me. And said, I'm not supposed to do this, but I saw your tweet. I actually know where your computer is. And he sent me a picture of the thing on a shelf somewhere, like on a rack. I don't know if do you have Costco here or any of those kind of things? That's basically what the cloud is. It's like a big giant warehouse store with just a bunch of refrigerators that have blinky lights on it. And he was in the middle of it somewhere over here and literally said, I'm in the warehouse right now doing maintenance and I can hear your computer grinding in the corner. Right? This is back when hard drives had wheels inside. Spinning rust, literally just rust spinning in a circle. And the bad thing about that is that once they stop, they'll never start up again. That's the thing that's really scary about these kind of machines. They'll run for 10 years. And you know that the mean time before failure for a hard drive, you know how long that is? 2 million hours. Well, it's technically 5 years for a physical hard drive. I don't know about SSDs, but 2 million hours, that's a lie. Because there's only 4,000 hours in a year, so 2 million hours would be forever. So I'm going to go ahead and say BS to that statement. It's not 2 million hours, it's 5 years. I was on 13 years, right? So if you think about that in the context of the bell curve of it died when you bought it and you pulled it out of the package and it died immediately, which is it's a lemon, and 2 million hours, I was right here. So it was dying, it was bad. So I needed to immediately start figuring out how to get Hanselman.com and all of these different things off of my off of this machine. That's a modernization problem. And most modernization situations like this don't involve a lot of intentionality. Now, even though I was an idiot to get myself into this situation, I'm actually giving myself a little pat on the back for getting out of it in a conscious and intentional way. And I want you to think about this. When you're thinking about modernization, it's not open it up into Visual Studio, hope Visual Studio figures it out, run some tool, and then curse the tool when it doesn't work. Like, this is a bigger issue than that. Any kind of modernization thing needs to be thought about in an intentional way. So I had the main website, I had the blog, and I had the podcast, and I also had Azure Friday, which is another podcast. And I've got another show right now called Scott and Mark Learn To, with Mark Russinovich that you should check out. Okay, so I've got these kind of sites, and I'm running over there. And I needed to think intentionally about how I can get them moved over as quickly as possible and what modernization means. They were originally running on a varying series of things. This was ASP.NET MVC Razor. This was ASP.NET 2.0 Web Forms. Don't laugh about Web Forms. Web Forms is the best. This was on 4.8 Razor. This was on Razor.NET Core 1-ish, and I think this was a static website. So it's a bunch of crap, but Hanselman.com was this mix of things, and I needed to think about it intentionally with complexity, sorted by reverse complexity. So what is the easiest possible thing that I could upgrade just to prove the point? And then what kind of a system could I set up that would allow me to do this? This was the hardest one, so I moved it to the end. This right here was just a Razor page, and it was basically a brochure. It's the home page. It's where I'm speaking. It's got books. It's got talks. It's got a list from some RSS, but it's not, it's got active content. This is active content. But as a general rule, it's pulling from web services. It's not pulling from a database. Additionally, it didn't have anything that was Windows specific. And that's really important to think about, because this is running on a physical machine running Windows Server 2000. Now, the naive thing that we often do at our companies is we'll do a lift and shift, where you go and you run disk to VHD, you pick up the disk and you move it into the matrix and you run it in a VM, and then you say, ha-ha, we made it to the cloud. But then you have to go and remote into the thing and run Windows Update. We even talked to an organization recently that found that it was cheaper for them to just have students SSH into Linux machines and run upgrades rather than go and buy a system to do those upgrades manually. Like, that kind of thinking is just asking for trouble. It's just kick the can, technical debt down the road. So I had a lot to do here. I needed to think about the latest .NET, which version I wanted to be on, whether or not I wanted to go cross-platform, whether or not I cared about operating system. There was then implied cost. Then there was all this stuff that I'd been doing manually, like SSL certs. It might sound silly now, but there was a time when every year I would have to schedule an afternoon, buy an SSL cert, download a PFX, remote desktop into a machine, go into IIS, import the certs, bind them in, and that's a thing. And people think that's silly, but for 20 years, that was how we did that kind of stuff. All the while, you've got new standards coming out and new updates to Chrome. Chrome is threatening to Google is threatening not to list your sites if you don't use SSL. So this is a couple years ago, and if you're not secure, they're going to lower you down. Now they're actually saying not secure with a big red badge. So that was a thing to think about. But then there's also DevOps, which we used to call a build server. But now they call it DevSecOps because it's cool to have sec in the middle of stuff. But ultimately, having a build server, because I realized that I was afraid of this stuff because I didn't regularly build it, and I didn't know when the last time I was building it was. So all of that was a thing to think about. And then I realized that my best friend in all of this was going to become DNS. I'm a big fan of using DNS and abusing your systems by having DNS be the front thing you think about. So what I did was I did a disk to VHD, which just basically puts a Band-Aid on cancer. The machine is going to die, but I make a copy of it. So I've got both the FTP copy of the code, and then I've got the the disk image itself. And then I spun up staging.hanselman.com with that VM in the cloud. So now I've got www.hanselman.com pointing at the physical machine. I've got staging pointing at a virtual machine in the cloud. And I'm going to go and put DNS in front of it. And by putting it in front of it, I need a reverse proxy. I need a Cloudflare. I need an Azure front door. I need something that doesn't terminate the URL at a real machine. And this is important because 20 years ago, when you typed hanselman.com, you got an IP address. And that IP address wasn't a front door. It wasn't Cloudflare. It wasn't a CDN. It was a physical machine in Anna's desk in French Canada. And when you hit hanselman.com port 443, the PFX, the cert, the SSL cert, loaded off the disk and was served to you, terminated at that IIS server. That's way too personal. Like, you don't give out your personal address. The analogy would be, I don't know you, I'll give you my PO box. Right? You have to have an indirection level between you. You don't give people your real address. You give them your PO box. You don't give them your phone number. You give them your Google Voice. So putting something in front of this, for me, was going to be front door. So if we go over here and we switch to personal and we go to portal.azure.com, and we load it, and it's exciting, and it's loading. And we go in here, and we type AFD, and we go to front door profiles. We can see the Hanselman Azure front door. And under front door manager, this is where the money is. This is where the interesting stuff is. This is an auto-generated front door URL that no one ever sees. Hanselman.com terminates at that. And once I have that, I can go and say 10% of the traffic on staging and 90% of the traffic on the other one. And if the thing broke one evening, I can just swap it over completely. Having that slider bar and having that front door terminate here made a huge difference. Additionally, front door offered me free SSL certificates, free wildcard certs, automatically spins them. I could bring my own, and initially for a couple of months I did. But then I realized that they're going to give me those certs for free anyway, so that's cool. The thing that's nice about this is that what it points to doesn't matter. It doesn't have to point to Azure stuff. It can point to virtual machines. It can point to app services. It gives me a lot of flexibility. It cannot be overstated how useful it is to have a reverse proxy sitting in front of all your stuff. Because what that means now is I can go and look at, for example, blog, see I can start canonicalizing my URLs. A lot of you have a website where I can hit both www or what's called a naked or an apex domain, which is this one here. And you haven't decided which one is official. So then both of them will show up in Google. So this also was an opportunity for me to canonicalize my domain. Canonicalize. And that helps with SEO, which is Google Juice. Because I wanted to make sure that I was still going to be like, the top of Google. Now, when I go and look at these groups and figure out how those endpoints get pointed, I can also start splitting up my content with my images, which was super useful as well, because right now, people who are visiting me from Australia would go and get that server in French Canada, which means that every image on the blog needs to make it all the way over there. So while I'm in the middle of this modernizing exercise and moving stuff into the cloud, I can start thinking about a CDN. And I'm not trying to sell Azure Front Door, because historically Front Door has been super expensive, but the latest iteration of Front Door is actually super reasonable, and it is both a front door and a content distribution network. So if we go over to the blog and pick one of the images, here's an image, open image in new tab. Why am I running vertical tabs like a savage? My God. You can see that, again, DNS to the rescue. I go and make a CNAME that is images.hanselman.com, one line of code that swaps that out inside of my application, and then that does this read-through technique where it goes to the CDN, doesn't find the image, then goes to the origin, which is the blog itself, and then the next time it's been cached. So suddenly now I'm getting a perf benefit just by putting a front door on top of it and changing all my URLs for images from www to images. You with me so far? So as I'm starting to make these moves, I'm looking for opportunities, and they're like zero effort opportunities. And DNS keeps coming up as an opportunity to do that and make it easy. Now, this application is super basic, so I went and used the .NET Upgrade Assistant. And the .NET Upgrade Assistant is right here. And there is a Windows version and a driving manual shift command line version. And I'm a big fan of driving stick shift, manual shift. So I did that and I ran it at the command line. I really like tools like this. Between this tool and another lovely tool, which is called .NET Outdated, which is scrumptious. This is my command prompt, by the way. Here's the current directory. Here's the current Git branch. I've got some polls I need to go up there. I've got some modified files. I've got the fact that I'm on a dev drive, how long the last command took. This is the latest version of .NET, and that is my blood sugar in real time. Not cool? Where's the other one? Yeah, see? Woohoo! Yeah. So blood sugar goes from me, well, blood, needle, hops to Bluetooth, Bluetooth to the cloud, cloud to a REST API into a Mongo database, and then down into my prompt so that I can tell both my blood sugar and the version of .NET, the two most important things in my life. Woo! Cool. So that gets under 60. Someone Glenn, just jump up and save me. Okay. Cool. All right, cool. Oh, and then I also have these really cool little colorful icons because seriously, like, what are you all doing? Some of you all are living your lives like this, and I just hurt for you. Like, what are we doing here, kids? Is this what we're doing? No. Colorful. How do we edit our files with the command line? Like that. That's how people were meant to edit their files, right? That's how you do YAML, right? In 1986, right? Can we do this? Can we go back to these times? This is how people are meant to do things. No? Okay. What? Hallelujah. No, I'm just an old man that shakes his fist at the cloud. I was going to go into Vim, but I wouldn't know how to get out of it, so it's best that we probably just don't run that at all. Okay. Oh, .NET Outdated. What the hell am I doing? Okay. So I'm going to run out .NET Outdated. This is great. Look at this. I love that we're having a renaissance at the command line right now of colorful things with emoji. Isn't it just a great time to be a command line person? Everyone's got their 3D accelerated graphics cards, and I just want an ASCII progress bar, just a rainbow progress bar. It's all it takes to make me happy. So here you can see the red is major versions, the green are probably minor builds that are easy, and the yellow are minors that might want me to slow down, but I can make decisions here about whether or not I want to make a move to update these things. So between .NET Outdated, which is looking at the kind of the transitive dependency tree of my entire application, and the .NET Upgrade Assistant, I can start at the leaf nodes and start moving backwards. So upgrading intentionally from Hanselman.com was super easy because it didn't do anything Windows specific. And I think that this is an important thing that we don't talk about enough. 20, 30 years ago, when .NET was starting out, it was a Windows-only thing. There was COM, there was IIS, and it was like a different Microsoft, right? And this new time, where .NET is just cross-platform, and a lot of people who are under 30 just assume that, they kind of forget about why code is hard to port. So if we went out to the command line, again, because we're just rolling like that, and let's go out to like the temp folder, and I'm just making this demo up on my own, right? Let's go make dir, whatever, dude. Oh, we'll go into there, because that's not how you spell whatever. And then let's just be totally crazy. Let's .NET new console. Okay, and then let's go and say, we're not going to say cat, we're going to say bat, because bats are cooler than cats. And we're going to say bat program.cs. This is a really cool application that's like type or cat, but it's bat and it has color. So there's an application, console.writeline. Okay, cool. So I can go and say .NET build, which would be fine, but that would involve me typing .NET build. So I bound Control-Shift-B to just type .NET build for me, because it's in my hand already, right? So I'm just walking around like that, ready to Control-Shift-B, Control-Shift-B. Okay, so we just built that, right? And I could go in here and I could open up the CS proj if I wanted to. Beep-a-doop-boop. Right? I'm just doing this to be obnoxious, by the way. I do know that there are other editors available. I understand that Visual Studio Code is a popular editor. And I could go and build that. So I just built that on .NET 8. So you can see here, I'm just switching between 9 and 8. And I built this whateverdude.dll, and I could then go push D into the current folder, and then bin debug net 8. So now we're in there, and you can see that we've got this whateverdude.dll, which is only 4K, and then we've got this larger one that is shockingly much bigger. That's because the .NET.exe is sitting at the front of that, and we've got the DLL and the executable along for the ride. And I can run this in two ways. I could run it like this, okay? Or I could do it at scale, okay? Or I could say .NET exec, whatever, dude, like that. So I don't need to run the executable if I want to run just the DLL. So that's interesting, okay? But then, totally brainstorming here, what if I wanted to take that to Linux? What if I wanted to run that somewhere else? I don't know. Let's take the current folder, which is right here, and let's put that in the clipboard. And then let's go and open up Mono, which was cross-platform.net before it was cross-platform.net. And we'll go into that folder. And let's say mono, whatever, dude. That ran. So that's cool. That's a reminder. That's like a visceral reminder that .NET compiles into intermediate language. And in this case here, when it says console.writeLine to go and output to the screen, where's the console? Like, who's calling that? What is that? What's underneath console.writeLine? Well, it's a Win32 Windows-specific API that's going to call into like Win32.dll, and then we're going to make a transition from managed code into native code. I'm reminding you of that because it doesn't matter what you do in .NET. At some point, it's going to go and hit a socket library or play a sound or do something. And when it hits that, it's now operating system specific. Make sense? And here, it's not doing anything really complicated because the only thing this app does is write with console.writeLine. And it just ran. I compiled it with one thing and ran it with another. I compiled it with .NET 8, 9 SDK and ran it with Mono. Let's try something else. I don't know if this will work. CSC, I think that's what it's called. Let's go to the developer command prompt, and let's go into that folder, into this folder, into the dark gray sad place of DOS, and say CSC/T, I think it's DLL, program that's been 20 years, no, library. Maybe I can do exe. Console does not exist. Oh, yeah. So in this case here, Huh? Cool. So in that case, I used .NET 4.8's developer command prompt on the .NET full framework and compiled it again as well. Could I then go and run that on Mono? Hell, I don't know. Who's making this up as they go along, right? Yes. I ran the DLL, I ran the executable, I compiled it on .NET 4.8, I ran it on, it doesn't matter. Did you all know that? You probably knew it in your heart, but you never really thought about it. But it's important to say, so why does that matter to modernization? The Bing team, Bing.com, of all places, right? Both of the people that use Bing care about this. No, they are really on the forefront of modernization. They did this really clever thing, and I had the chief architect on my podcast. It was so cool. Check this out. They continued to compile all of Bing.com with the .NET 4.8 stuff for like 2 years, and then chose to run it under different runtimes. So at any moment, you might hit Bing.com, and 20% of it was running on .NET 4.8, and some of it was running on .NET 6, and some of it was running on .NET 5. There's no reason that you can't compile the stuff. So the problem was that their build system was complicated, And they separated then their build system from their runtime system. They just chose to run it differently. How clever is that? And that gave them flexibility. So then they got to test the stability of the runtime, and then later on, when they switched to the new compiler, they got all the benefits of the new compiler and all that kind of stuff. That meant that they could compile the stuff one way and get the jitter and all of that phased jitting stuff on the runtime side without making it difficult, because there were people using older versions of Visual Studio, older versions of .NET. Just the fact that you can do that and split that up and then read about it online is super, super interesting and super cool. And I appreciate those of you that are trying your best to stay awake, because I can see some of you are nodding off, and it's okay, Glenn. You can just take a nap, and I respect you because I know you're jet-lagged. It's an hour time zone change, and it's crushing. Yeah, I understand. I came from a 2-hour time zone change. I, too, am jet-lagged. Glenn's my buddy, so it's okay. All right, cool. So when these things call like console.writeline, that's not a big deal. If I go and take this over into Ubuntu, let's see if we can do that. Let's go and we'll say start dot, which is going to load up Explorer. Let's go and say Ubuntu. You know it's Ubuntu because the background is purple. And we'll say whatever, dude. We'll go into that folder. If you don't believe that it's Ubuntu, there's htop. Now you believe it. If you still don't believe, you can run lsb release-a, and I proved it. Now we have an empty folder. I'm going to not type start dot, but I'm going to type explorer.exe dot, which allows me to run Windows applications from Ubuntu, because why not? Now I've loaded up Explorer. That's hot. Talking to my Ubuntu page there. I'm going to go ahead and drop that in there. Boop. Check it out. Now we've got code. Do we have .NET on this machine? Which .NET? We do. .NET info. Whoop. .NET 8, magical. Can I run this? I don't know, probably not. I don't even remember what I compiled it with. Okay, so this one's interesting. It says libhostpolicy.so, and SO is a shared object. That's like DLLs for Linux people. Is not available on that machine, and I could go and have done a self-contained build and like bring more stuff along for the ride. But we could also try going down in here and seeing if I have the stuff that I need. Hey, cool. So now I compiled it on Windows with Windows 4.8's original compiler that was created before we thought about Linux, and then copied it over to Linux and ran it on Linux. Why did that work? That's because there's no direct binding to console.writeline on Windows. I didn't compile it for Windows. I compiled it for IL, for intermediate language. And .NET.exe, the native thing on that machine, takes it the last mile. That's the magic of .NET. So when I was transferring my blog over to .NET, what are some things that I bumped into? This was easy, didn't care, ran on Linux right away. It is shocking, if you don't call any Windows-specific APIs, how easy it is to get even 20-year-old stuff running on Linux. It's bananas. See how much time we have. I might be able to do something stupid here in a second. So if you call a Windows-specific API, then you're in trouble, because all you're going to get is a method missing error. So on my blog, I called into the registry. Doesn't exist on Linux. And I was hard-coding backslashes. Backslashes are apparently verboten on the Linux. You want to use forward slashes. So you can change that, or you can use system.io.path separator, which is a constant. So I had to run around in like 6 places on my application and tell it, don't do that, and then suddenly things worked. The only part that was super, super hard was that I had custom code to do time zone math, because blogs think about what is the time zone on the local machine, what is the time zone on the machine that you're serving from, and what is the time zone of the person that's visiting from, and how do you make sure that they all see the correct times. Well, there's a time zone database on Windows that's in the registry. We exported it as XML, then we shipped it with our app, and then later on, .NET came out with a time zone class to solve those kind of problems. But there'll be weird little edge cases. Sometimes you'll work at a company and they'll have some weird COM object that was bought 30 years ago and they don't know how it works, and they want that to run on Linux or something like that. That's going to be a problem, and usually you want to hide those things. Sometimes we've seen people put them in like a Windows container, a Windows VM, and then call them with a REST API call. But like, you can compartmentalize the bits of your project that are doing weird Windows stuff, and then once you do that, once you get into the .NET Core world, once you get into 5.6, the stuff that you can start doing, like, just gets better and better and better. So that's good. Now, web forms was the real issue, because web forms, people hate on web forms, but let me tell you, 2002 was a beautiful time, and it worked really well. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. But it's not that web forms does weird stuff and has a weird programming model, it's that it is married to IIS. It only works because it knows too much about the Internet Information Server. And when .NET Core, now .NET 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, came out, it came with a web server called Kestrel. And Kestrel is non-denominational. It's not trying to sell you Windows. It works great on Windows. It works great on Linux. It's super high performant. But that meant that the web forms, like, baked-in knowledge of IIS was going to be a problem. There are a couple of ways to get around that. One of which is called .vvm. This is a model view model framework, and they've got a way to move to web forms apps. So basically, you take your ASPX pages and then one at a time move it to their very, very similar templating engine, and you can go and do that. That's one way to do it. With DOS Blog, what we ended up doing was we noticed that of the 12 or so projects we have in our complicated blogging engine, only one project cared about ASPX pages. And there was only like the main page, individual blog controls, and comments. So we found it faster to just port those to Razor pages. What we did is we started at the leaf nodes, we started at the database, basically the database in quotes, which was just XML files that represented the sum total of all of my blog posts. It's like 6,000 XML files in a folder, because the file system is a perfectly good database, so you don't need to think about that otherwise. It really works great. And then we took the runtime and we ported it. And again, I can chop pieces up. And we got the entire thing compiling and running on .NET Core, except for the web forms bit, which we continued to compile on the old stuff. And then waited until the last minute, and then we switched that over. And you can see all of that code over at GitHub at Papa String. This is Mark Downey on the .NET team. And Papa String converted DOS Blog. That's my wife. Hello, wife. Sorry, I'm doing a talk. And he converted it to DOS Blog Core. So that is the DOS Blog that I'm currently running on right now, and it's .NET 8.0, which is super cool. And you can see exactly how this code, some of this code is jank. Like, some of this code is literally 20 years old, particularly down here in the runtime. Some of this code hasn't been changed in 6, 7, 8, 10 years, but it still compiles, because if it's clean .NET code, then it works great. There's no reason to go and put in link and put in all the fancy bits and stuff. If it compiles and it passes the tests, then you're in a really good position. Which brings me to testing. Testing was a huge thing for me because I mentioned fear-driven development before, and I really believe strongly in that. If you can't run, compile, test your code without fear, you're really in a bad spot. We had unit tests already, but we wanted to be able to take it even farther. We had unit testing, but we didn't have any actual clicky-clicky testing. We would basically deploy it and then click around ourselves. But once we moved everything over into .NET, and .NET 5, 6, 7, modern .NET, we could go and do things with Docker. And that became really, really interesting. Because once you've got something running on modern .NET, getting it running in Docker is effectively trivial. And we built up a multi-stage Docker file. So that means rather than building and running in the same file, we build at one layer right here. We copy all the code into the Docker file, do the build inside of Docker. Then the results we copy out into a folder called app. We run testing, which I'll talk about in a second. When the tests pass, we do a formal publish, all happening inside of the Docker file. It makes it very, very reliable and very deterministic, because all the building, the thing that gets published to the cloud, happened in Docker. We publish it into a folder called out, and then on line 46 there, we copy from the out folder on one layer into the root folder of a Docker container that only contains the runtime. Doesn't even contain the compiler, doesn't contain the SDK. It's much, much smaller. So having that multi-phase thing means that less code gets shipped. Again, all of this happens only once you've gotten into modern.NET. Like, each of these is like a couple of hours. Then, the cool part is that the amount of work that has happened to make Docker containers kick ass is amazing. We have not just a random Docker container, but we have multiple levels of them, different distros. You can do Ubuntu, you can do Alpine, and then we have a thing called chiseled containers. Are you familiar with chiseled containers? There's two really amazing things that happened in .NET in the last couple of years, and one is chiseled containers, and the other one is tree trimming. And they're freaking insane. Think about where we started. We had a physical computer under someone's desk that had an old operating system. But I really only needed 50 functions, maybe 30 functions. That operating system had calculator and solitaire and WordPad and all this old crap, and had been sitting under this person's desk. And then when I virtual machined it, it was still 30 gigs, and it still had solitaire and PowerShell and a bunch of crap. But if you look at the essence of your app, in my case, a blog, yes, Windows has 35,000 APIs you can call, but how many did I need to call? 50? So what chiseled containers do is they only ship the functions that you want and only the absolute minimum, and they don't even ship with the possibility of running as admin. So even if a bad guy attacks that container and gets into it, there's no function. They can't even call the functions because the functions don't even exist. And then on the .NET side, you do what's called tree trimming. Imagine taking a tree and you flip it upside down, so you're holding it by the trunk, and you shake it really hard, and all of the dead leaves fall off. Our little application that we made there that is just doing console.writeLine, what if we don't even ship readline? We just shake it really hard and we trim off all of the IL that's never getting called. There's like 15 different functions on console, system.console. Let's just ship the one that we call. So then on the native side, we ship just the functions we call. On the managed side, and then on the native side, we only ship the underlying libraries that need to get called. So if we go off and search for .NET, Ubuntu, chiseled containers, blog, boop. Look at that. This container, he's got down to 7 libraries. That's it. SSL, GCC, some C runtimes, a graphics library, that's it. He can probably get even smaller. And he gives you different choices. You can pick the chiseled one, you can pick the Alpine one, you can pick the full one, and they all have different sizes. You can get as small as possible, down to a chiseled container being just 100 megs. And it's a fundamental different way of thinking. I had a 30 gig disk image that ran a 20-year-old version of Windows. But when you invert the problem, when you flip it on its head and you think, how many functions does my business app need to actually call? HTTP, make some strings, system.text, maybe link. Then suddenly my 30 gigs is down to a couple hundred megs. And the surface area is smaller, the density is more, I can run as many of these as I want. And once I get all of that into modern.NET, I can come over here, and I can do something like Docker build, go and build my whole application on Docker. I'm doing it here on, this is an ARM-based laptop. That's another thing I didn't even mention. This whole time I've been zipping around on an ARM laptop. So as soon as you go away from Windows, x64, x86, .NET 4.8, and you move over into modern.NET, Mac, Linux, x64, ARM, ARM64, ARM 8.7, ARM 8, just for giggles, I got the thing running on a Raspberry Pi. And a gentleman from RavenDB gave me go visit their booth, gave me a Raspberry Pi Zero W and said that I could probably run RavenDB and my blog on a Raspberry Pi that small. That's insane. Raspberry Pis are really, really good Docker containers. The idea that something I wrote 20 years ago can run on something like this, but then also the freedom that it offers me once I start having some reasonable amount of like lack of fear. I'm also going to run what are called headed tests. There's headless tests where you run your browser headless and you click around and stuff. But remember how I mentioned that I didn't have a way to go and click on these things. What I ended up doing was installing Playwright, which is like Selenium. It's a browser testing system. You should try Playwright. It's freaking amazing. Here I just had code coverage just went by. I've got 73% code coverage. Look, browsers are launching, and now it's going to load the application locally, and it's going to start clicking on it and typing in the search box and testing the whole application. And I'm just one guy, right? And this is the thing, right? The whole like 10x developer thing is BS. Right? It's just whether or not the developer is told about these great tools. Hanselman International, spanning millions of page views and 5 different sites. It's just me and a bunch of batch files. You know what I mean? But it makes me feel like it's a big deal because now I can look at this and see all I'm doing. So now I can go over to hanselminutes.com, which is the podcast. By the way, the podcast has been going on for now 981 episodes, which is, thank you for the whistle. That is every Thursday for the last 20 years. And if you just scroll back, it's just a bunch of lovely people doing lovely work. But if we scroll all the way to the bottom, zoom, zoom, zoom. I can see the git commit and the build. I wouldn't recommend you do this because this is not like an important site. You should put like if is admin as a thing around that, which is what Stack Overflow does. They can see a bunch of stuff when they're logged in as admin. But check this out. Open. That was the last time that I made an update. I changed to polyfill, and I can see the exact build that is in production right now, linked to directly from my site. And then I can go directly into Azure DevOps. And because I'm running all this stuff in a container, all those Playwright tests, they run headless, and it breaks the build. So if I mess up the CSS and it can't click on a button or it can't click and some of the JavaScript doesn't work, that breaks the build. That level of confidence that I have now is much greater. And then if we go back over to the portal, check out my dashboard. We used to fly people out with suits, like consultants, to make dashboards. If you want to feel like you're a fancy startup, just go and buy like a cheap television set and get like a Raspberry Pi and just put the Azure portal up on the back wall so when people enter your startup, they see like all the charts and graphs and stuff. Let's see if we can get this to load over the luscious conference Wi-Fi that we are enjoying right now. Come on, computer, people are watching. Okay, so I've got 156 users on the site right now. I can see my average processor time is an absolutely fantastic 0.1%, so my app is chillaxing. And I can see I've got some failed requests. It's probably Rob Connery trying to break my website. Let's zoom in on that and see if it's him. It looks like we've got 21 people that are sending me 400s. Why are they doing that? Click on that. Someone's posting to index. Well, I know that you can't do that because index doesn't take a post. Let's go ahead and say show all. Scroll down. They're in New York. It's not Rob. He doesn't live in New York. And show all available telemetry plus and minus 5 minutes. And I can go and see that it looks like it's a script kiddie who's running some stuff against me. In the old days, we used to have to FTP log files and search and control F our way to glory. So the 10x developer is knowing these tools and being able to do that and feeling confident in their websites. It's but you've got to get to .NET 5, 6, and above. That's the trick. Once you get there, you can start putting systems around it. getting it to run anywhere on Windows, on Linux, getting it to work with code coverage tools, DevOps, actions, all that kind of stuff. And then updating from something like .NET 8 to .NET 9, 17% more perf. .NET 6 to .NET 8, 30% more perf. So then we go back to my Azure. Come on, I've lost so many. I don't have so many tabs are going on here. We can see how full we've made this. One of the big mistakes that people make with Azure is they put they don't abuse Azure enough. Let's just be frank. They think that you need one web app and one app service plan, and that's stupid. I shove as many web apps as I can into one app service plan. So right now, one app service plan is running my blog, my podcast, Azure Friday, and the main page of my site. And let's look at the memory. Let's see how we're doing on memory percentage. Oh yeah, 85%, right? 82%. You would never do that on a metal machine because you'd feel like you didn't have enough headroom. But for me, it's about money. I don't want to spend any more money than I possibly can. So I've actually loaded 20 years of blog posts into memory, into a hash table. Right? Because cloud compute is typically a little bit slow. Right? The IOPS that you get are typically slow. If someone hits your blog and they suddenly want to go and open a database connection, I hate visiting WordPress blogs, and it's like, I can't get to the database. Database, load every blog post for the last 20 years into memory. Hold it all into RAM. So how much do we pay, friends? Let's go to Scale Up and find out. Beep, boop, bop, boo. Microsoft is not very good at naming stuff. The basic B3 for vCPUs is $48. But the premium, which is twice as fast, is $7 less. All right. So I upgraded to a basic, got slightly less RAM, but double the perf and an SSD, and it cost me $7 less. And I'm right at 81, 82%. And then if it's Black Friday or whatever, I don't sell anything, but let's say everyone visits my blog on Black Friday, and then the traffic goes up, yeah, I'll just scale up, and I'll pay a little bit more for a couple of days, and then I'll scale back down. Absolutely abusing the system, which makes me very, very happy. So SSL certs are free, got a build server for free, got the DevSecOps. DevSecOps. Dependabot. Oh my God, you guys, it's so good. Take a look at this. If we go to GitHub and go to my website and we go to pull requests and we go to Dependabot, Dependabot will send you pull requests. I've been ignoring this one for a year. It's like a person that's not a person that will send you pull requests to bump versions of stuff, and they'll even leave release notes about why and what's changed and what are the commits. So then I can go and merge that in or not. Again, 10x dev, right? All free, don't have to do anything, but you got to get on the latest stuff. So fast forward, I've got my machine out from underneath Anna's desk. I'm on .NET 8 on all of my stuff. It runs cross-platform. It runs on a Raspberry Pi. It runs in Linux, which costs 30% less than Windows. I've got the SSL certs for free. Everything's canonicalized. And I also updated to a CDN, so all of my images are now at images.hanselman.com, as well as the MP3s and the images for the podcast. And it was all done in like a couple of weeks in my spare time. And now I pay $41 a month to run all of those websites. So I hope that this gives you a good reason to upgrade to the latest version of .NET and use, whether it be Azure or AWS, I don't care. If you don't want to use Azure, fine. It's more Azure for me. But like, you can do really cool stuff and not cost a ton of money on Azure, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you for hanging out. Please subscribe to my podcast.